Don't tell me that the moon is shining. Show me the glint of light on broken glass. Hello and welcome to Shining Moon, episode 41, Reading the Nebulas 2. I'm your host, Deborah L. Davitt. With me today to read the novelette category for the Nebulas are Allen Dyen-Shapiro, Leigh Harlen, and Brent Lambert. Let's get started with some introductions. Allan Dyen-Shapiro is a Ph.D. biochemist who enjoyed a 19-year research career. He now teaches in high-poverty schools in Southwest Florida and recently ramped up his union activism. He's sold short fiction to venues including Dark Matter magazine, Flash Fiction Online, and numerous anthologies, and co-edited an anthology of speculative fiction set in the Middle East. He's a member of SFWA and Codex and blogs at AllenDyen-Shapiro.com, where you'll find links to his stories. Hello, Allan.
Hello, how are you?
I'm better than I was about 10 minutes ago when I was having technical problems, but we will stagger on merrily through. Next up, we have Leigh Harlen, who is a queer, non-binary writer of dark-leaning speculative fiction who lives and works in Seattle alongside their partner and dog. They are the author of Queens of Noise, Blood Like Garnets, love that title, Feast for Flies, and several short stories. Their non-writing hobbies include petting strangers' dogs, crocheting, and enthusing about how awesome bats are. Because bats are awesome. Yes.
They are indeed. I love them so much.
Follow them on Twitter at Leigh Harlen, or better yet, on Blue Sky at leigharlen.bsky.social for updates on future publications. Blue Sky is pretty much where the writing world departed to, so yes, Blue Sky is where it's at. Welcome to the podcast, Leigh.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right. And then finally, we have Brent Lambert, who is a Black queer man who heavily believes in the transformative power of speculative fiction across media formats. As a founding member of FIYAH Literary Magazine, he turned that belief into action and became a part of a Hugo Award winning team. He resides in San Diego, but spent a lot of time moving around as a military brat. Hey, we've got that in common. I didn't move around, but I'm definitely a military brat, so that's nice to see. His family roots are in the Cajun country of Louisiana. Welcome to the podcast, Brent.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to speak with all of you. This is going to be a fun podcast. So we're going to dive right into the stories. I'm going to give a brief preview of each of the stories so that the listeners can say, hey, I want to read that, and go get that on the links that will be at the bottom of the page. And then we'll discuss each one in turn. A short biography of a conscious chair is by Renan Bernardo. He's a friend of the podcast. He was on in one of our eco writing episodes early on. This appeared in Samovar in February of 2023, which means that not only did he write this, but he also translated it out of the original Portuguese into English, which is a skill set that I do not have. I can write in one language. I can stagger along a little bit in my second language. There is no way I'm translating something elaborate like this into another language. That is amazing to me. In this case, the title presents the promise and the story fulfills it. The conscious chair was brought to life by the hands that crafted it, but it doesn't wind up going to the person she intended to have it when she dies. This is the first time that the chair has a reason to mourn that flesh and bone are less abiding than oak. It's then sold to a furniture warehouse where it languishes until a man sees it and brings it home with a fancy bunch of other furniture purchased to tempt his beloved granddaughter to stay home here instead of going back to Portugal for good. Over the course of the story, we're initially left as confused as the chair as to why the granddaughter treats her grandfather, who helped raise her after the death of her parents, with such contempt. Gradually, we become aware that the grandfather is aware of the life pulsing in the chair. He talks to the chair, and finally admits that once he brought another inanimate thing to life himself inadvertently, a simple stool. Feeling responsible for that life, when fire came to his house, he'd carried that stool outside first and only then returned for his son and son's wife. But by then it was far too late. His granddaughter, in learning that he carried a stool out of that burning house in preference to her parents, has never forgiven him for it. The grandfather dies in the richness of time. The grandson and his partner send the chair to be stored at a furniture warehouse, where its consciousness slowly seeps from it, and one of its final thoughts that it has is that it's been a member of the family, and that all of them are made of oak. I thought this was an evocative story. What did you guys think of it? And I'm going to start basically just in alphabetical order to start with, and then I'll start reversing alphabetical order. Then I'll start calling on people at random if you don't immediately just pop up with answers yourself. So, Allan, what did you think of this?
I thought the story was brilliant. I really enjoyed it. I thought the unusual conceit of having it from the point of view of the chair was what hooked me and brought me in. I thought the late reveal that Eduardo also crafted conscious furniture, which is really almost at the end of the story, was a brilliant twist at the end that it enabled him to just sit and tell the background, because that was so stunning that he said that I was definitely waiting for the answer at that point. And I thought I liked the theme also quite a bit. I liked it that it was very non-judgmental. It wasn't judging the daughter for choosing to move to Portugal. It wasn't really judging the Eduardo for choosing the chair that he brought to life, thinking that it's just a few minutes, he'll be able to get his children out very quickly, and then being wrong. It was really non-judgmental, and I like the idea of the chair being welcomed into the family. I thought that was really strong, and I had read this several times before I actually was to prepare for this podcast, because I saw it first a lot earlier than that, and it just blew me away right from the first read, and I've grown to like it even more ever since.
All right. Leigh, how about you? What did you like, or was there something that you disliked? Is there anything that you'd like to say about this one?
I really like this one too. I thought it was just a very lovely, kind of melancholy story, and the use of having it be an inanimate object I thought was actually really a very interesting thing to do, because it, you're seeing it from a perspective of somebody with no agency in the situation. And I think that gives it just this kind of interesting depth and color that, in a lesser writer's hand might have come off as a gimmick, but I thought it was just absolutely brilliantly done.
And Brent, what did you think of this one?
Yeah, this one definitely, at first I was not sure what I was getting into when I read it, but then as it went, it just got so real, I guess. Like the family interactions, and I knew this was in the hands of someone who was skilled, because there was so much being said without being said. Like that conversation at the dinner table, that was
there's a lot being done by inference in this story.
Right. And I think that's what works, because that's how families tend to work. Like people don't just say their grievances out loud. It's like it's all this tension just browned up, just waiting to pop. And the story does a really good job of telling you so much without saying anything at all.
All right. I thought it was a fascinating conceit that it was all done through the point of view of the chair. As Leigh points out, it is definitely a lack of agency, but it's not passive by any stretch of the imagination. It's a hard balance to strike, because the chair has reactions to everything, and it's the next story we're going to talk about is I Am AI by Ai Zhang. It appeared in Shortwave in 2023. The story is not available to read for free online, and therefore I won't be participating in reviewing it, but I'm sure it's quite good because Ai Zhang is a notable writer. I believe that the three of you managed to read it, which is awesome. So I'm going to sort of sit back and say, hey, Brent, what did you think of this story?
So I definitely it felt a little too close to home lately. When I was reading, I was like, this is just too much right now for it to not be really depressing. It was good, but it definitely, I think it does that thing that I think all good science fiction does, and takes a current problem and extrapolates it to the future and imagines it in its worst possible form. which it's addressing the rise of AI, which is what we're seeing now, and how it's like it's like attempting to take away jobs and absorb creativity. So the story does a good job, I think, of extrapolating that. And we have this main character who is so desperate to like not be absorbed by the corporate machine that they're trying to pretend to be AI, and they're killing themselves trying to do it. And so I found it to be, like I said, it just does that thing that I think all good science fiction does, and just extrapolates current problems.
All right. That's a very pertinent thing for me, because every job that I've currently been applying for, or the recruiters have contacted me about, have been, would you like to train in AI? And I'm like, no, I really don't want to do that. I think that would be an ethical quagmire. So Leigh, how about you? What did you think about this one?
I really like this one. This was one of my favorites. I mean, yeah, like Brent said, there was definitely very much an element of, oh God, this is so real right now. I also thought that it was kind of interesting that this one, I felt, had a lot of crossovers with a couple of the other ones we'll talk about later, both in terms of use of AI as well as community building in a dystopia, which I think are, great themes to explore. But I just thought it was kind of interesting that those things came up through so many of the novelettes this time. And I don't know if that speaks to what people are wanting to read or what people are writing, or both. But I just thought it was kind of interesting.
Yeah, when I was talking to my husband about the upcoming broadcast, I was commenting that novelettes are such a niche category because it's so hard to get them published. And so you have concordantly fewer numbers of them out there for people to read. So yeah, it is definitely a microcosm of what is available for people to read. And some of those themes are just awash right now. The community building especially. Allan, what did you think about this one?
Well, what Brent and Leigh said, I'd like to focus on the prose, which I thought did some very interesting things. I thought that the neurotic nervousness of the protagonist really came through with these very long sentences, as if it's rambling and computer-like, but then it was punctuated by very short ones when the battery was running out. It was like a ticking clock, but the sentences got really short and choppy. And I think that contrast worked really well to the person who's essentially thinking like an AI and rambling and making connections and all that, but the battery's running out, so it's they're in definite danger. I thought that at the very, very end, the last three paragraphs had pretty much the longest sentences with the most complex punctuation of the entire story, and that's the only part at which the protagonist shows any sort of contentment. So I think the matching of the prose to the meaning of the words and the themes is actually a very hard thing to do. And I think this one does that quite well. I thought it was interesting in a story about AI, which in other ways is trying to get very realistic about details, that they were so metaphorical when they talked about the heart replacement, because obviously a heart is not something that leads to one's creative and unique expression. A heart pumps blood. But she mixed and matched the metaphorical with the very specific scientific details, like the rain that's corrosive to skin and metal, which would be about the pH of vinegar, 2.2 to 3, and the most acid rain in the world right now is 3.8. So the fact, if you have something that's going to be emitting a lot of sulfur dioxide or something like that 1,000 years from now, I can believe 2 to 3. That's very believable. But because you could still live in vinegar, you could bathe in pickle juice or whatever. And then they go to these very metaphorical things. But I think part of the reason for that is she was focusing on the challenges to writers and artists. So writers do wax between metaphorical and very specific. So I think I like the way she did all of those things in ways that are not exactly something you would immediately think to do. There's something that really raised that story to another level for me. But back on the just general details of what there was, I love the roaches, the people who were bioengineered to consume garbage. That was a wonderful detail.
Ah. Okay, then there's probably a reason that I'm kind of glad in retrospect that I did not do my homework on this piece, because roaches and me. No.
That was kind of the point.
I'm sure that it was. All right, our next story up is The Year Without Sunshine by Naomi Kritzer. It appeared in Uncanny in their November and December issue in 2023. Alexis is a member of a neighborhood that's dealing with ash in the atmosphere from an unspecified disaster that sounds like either nuclear fallout or the eruption of the Yellowstone supervolcano. Either way, there's no light to recharge solar systems or solar batteries, or light that will grow food. Supplies are short, especially propane, which one of her neighbors needs to run a generator so that his wife's oxygen system can run so she can live. They've already had a WhatsApp group for the neighborhood. Now they've got people power, people leaving memos in a little booth in someone's front yard, volunteers going door to door, a community coming together to take care of each other. They stand in marked contrast to the neighborhoods around them, from which teenage boys come trying to steal their food supplies, forcing neighbors to defend themselves non-lethally. This is very carefully pointed out that it's non-lethal. One of the boys later comes back and asking to become a part of a place where people take care of each other. And at the end, a patch of blue sky appears, a signal of hope for the coming year. I actually really liked this one. This one hit a lot of story beats for me that I particularly enjoyed, particularly after a lot of reading of Cozy this past year and a lot of science fiction where it talks about the future in a way in which people come together as a group to solve little problems, because you can't solve the big ones. It's not this big heroic deal. But it hits a lot of really good notes for me. But I'm going to start with Leigh. What did you think of this one?
Well, this is definitely one of the ones that I saw with a lot of overlap with IMAI, with the focus on community building in the midst of all of this dystopian, nightmarish. I thought it was extremely well researched, very well written, and the characters were just really, really well created. I will say it wasn't my favorite, but that has nothing to do with the story and entirely with my own taste, where I just kind of like things to be a little bit weirder.
It's fine. Yeah. Everybody's got their own. Brent, how about you?
So I definitely enjoyed it I think that one of the things I like the most about it is that it didn't immediately go to everything has fallen apart completely. Nothing works. And no, it was like some things still work. Like you could still send letters. Like there was still some government trying to like work through the situation. I think that feels more true to probably.
Absolutely it does.
Yeah. And I mean, being from Louisiana, I my family went through Katrina.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. And so in some respects, it kind of like reminded me of some of that, where you saw like people having to come together and trying to solve things because things weren't necessarily normal, but there was still like the government still was there. There was still like things that were working. It just, so I think I enjoyed the fact that that it didn't lean into complete and total collapse. Like things were still intact. I also
liked that as well.
Right. And I think I also I enjoyed the ending. Like I was so prepared for a terrible ending. I really was. There's a particular character, without spoiling anything, I'm like, oh, this person's dying. Like I was just so sure. and I was so pleasantly surprised when the ending did not give me that. And I was like, I can't breathe a sigh of relief, because like I feel like, like I'm not necessarily I guess I'm not a fan of Cozy necessarily. Well, no, I take that back. I can't say that because I edited Malcolm's 2 books. But I guess for this one it felt wholesome, and I felt a little good after reading it. So yeah.
When you say that, there was a moment in time when one of the car alarms went off, and it was going off at a time and a place where things weren't supposed to be going off. The first thing I thought was, oh no, that character has died.
Yeah, I was so sure. I was like, oh, terrible things are going to happen. and I'm happy I was proven wrong. Like, this is one of those stories. You know, sometimes the stories where like someone doesn't get knocked off, and you're like, that was a cop out. Like, that person definitely should not have survived that. But like this one, it felt totally believable. It felt earned. It felt like, you know,
It did.
yeah. So that was probably like my favorite piece of it.
Agreed. Allan, how about you? You have anything to add that you'd like to add?
Well, like Brent, I do have some relevant experience having lived in Southwest Florida and been through several hurricanes. So, what I also, it's interesting that him coming from Louisiana, the same thing struck me, that the entire story was less than a year. And the worst part of it, the really dysfunctional part, was the power outage after the storm only lasted 4 days. I've been in.
Yeah.
Power was out for more than 4 days after our last big hurricane. So this is really a limited dystopia where there is some light at the end of the tunnel. So what I was focusing on, though, was the suburban community. Edina was the first thing that struck me, because I've got a lot of family in Minneapolis. I have been to Edina, and I was thinking, they're being kind of harsh on these people. So the first thing I did is I Googled and looked up a lot of things about Edina, and I found out that actually 5% of Edina lives in poverty, and there is a fair amount of middle class there. And that was consistent with what I saw when I was there. And it actually is noted for having a very, very high number of black millionaires. But then again, there's other editorials on how neither the black millionaires nor the white millionaires are too happy with the poor people. And it's so I kind of asked my relatives, and they were pointing out that there's an old Edina and a new Edina. The new Edina is more like the rest of Minneapolis and the suburbs. The old Edina is very wealthy, very waspy. And when I said to them, well, if there was this sort of disaster that happened, do you think they would have hung that person in effigy, hung that
It's a mannequin. It's a mannequin.
Yeah, the mannequin in effigy, which says looters, saying they were threatening to kill all looters. And then they thought about it for a little while, and they said, yeah, they probably would in Edina. So apparently this is a pretty good take on what Edina would be like in a complete disaster, because it struck reality for the family I have who live in the Minneapolis area. What I thought really hit home was the lack of behavior meds, because I know lots and lots of people where that is absolutely essential to their functioning, and how serious she took that was really something I might not necessarily have thought to put in a story like this, but I think it really hit home hard. Now, when Kyle asked why they were caring for Susan, the disabled woman, that kind of hit a bit on the nose. But then again, these were teenagers. And at this phase of my life, I'm a high school teacher, and teenagers can be incredibly clueless about lots of things. And I can imagine a lot of the kids I teach asking that same question. So I like the idea that she put it in the mouth of a teenager, because it would not have worked in the mouth of an adult. So I would say that I also liked it, like what you pointed out, that the disasters were really never explained what happened. And in contrast to Brent and Leigh, I actually often do like hard science fiction. I have a background as a Ph.D. biochemist. I've kept up with the environmental science type stuff. I've taught environmental science. And I think she made incredibly good choices for what would be realistic ways of trying to do this sort of do-it-yourself community, with maybe one exception. I mean, there are already commercially available flywheels that you can basically run as a backup battery. That flywheel is just a really old technology where in very, very low resistance bearings, it turns round and round when the power's on, and then it kind of inverts and keeps turning and keeps generating electricity when the power is off. And since there are already home units you can buy and install in your house for a reasonable cost, it's a little, especially this is somewhat into the near future, it was a bit confusing to me that they thought of huge walls of battery backups, but they didn't think of flywheels. But in absolutely every other little nitty-gritty detail, I think she hit it right on. So I think this is, as a hardish science fiction treatment of something with a lot of heart to it, because it really, the essence is of community getting through a limited disaster. I'm not sure this would
Yeah.
have flown with a long-term disaster. I thought this was a very well-done piece. I really liked it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the fact that it was a limited disaster really shows through. Survived Ike and Harvey. So 10 days without power with a very cranky and very colicky 2-month-old without power. So yeah, that was fun. So I had great sympathy for the people going through it with their kids. And again, the behavioral medications, that was a nice touch, because I have a son who has autism and ADHD, and not being able to maintain him in any sort of balance would be excruciating. So yeah. But again, it was very limited, and it was a slow descent into the dilemma, because you start with having brownouts, and periodically, while the neighborhoods are blocked off, my big thing was, hey, buses are still running, because the guy who works for the power company is able to walk out and hop on a bus by and large most days to get to his job. So there are still functioning utilities of some sorts. It's not the complete Walking Dead disaster that we're primed to expect from disaster fiction. It's much more realistic in most respects, and I liked that.
I guess having lived through some things similar on a very short term with the hurricanes, the things that primed me to accept all this is I remember when the very first one that was big that I went through, I didn't stash nearly enough cash, because with all the power lines down, it goes to a cashless economy. And I drove around this complete disaster zone looking for an ATM, and I found what used to be a drive-up ATM, where 2 trees had fallen on either side of it. But remarkably, if you walked up to it, it was still dispensing cash. So that sort of experience sort of primed me for some of these things.
Yeah, the not being able to use credit cards is a whole thing. It's a very big thing in disasters. If people haven't been through that, it's surprising until you actually go through it. Then it's like, oh, I have to be prepared next time. We're going to move on to our next story, which is Imagine Purple-Haired Girl Shooting Down the Moon by Angela Liu in Clarkesworld. This appeared in June of 2023. This is a very dystopian piece. This is a hugely dystopian piece. And it ticks right along with some of my themes that I like to play with, which is what memory and how memory makes you who you are and that sort of thing. So this should have clicked along for me for all the reasons that I like to write about myself. I bounced a little bit off of it because it is so dystopian. But to narrate, in a future dystopia, 2 women are trying to save enough money to escape from the hellscape city that they live in. By day, they work in the warehouse, inking name change orbs that change a person's mind and identity completely. By night, they're sex workers in a brothel that's run by cyborged nuns. A corporate client makes a request of the narrator that she, in exchange for enough money to cover her shifts at the warehouse for a while, create a name change orb that's based on his memories of being young with a lover on the moon. She complies in spite of warnings from the Love Hotel that clients making extra requests should be denied. Her friend suffers a mental breakdown. It's not the first and clearly won't be the last. She slips her friend an NC orb to change her from Gina to Trina, as she's been Hina and Tina before, and works hard on the commission deal. It's enough money to maybe get them out of the city, until it's clear that the Love Hotel actually set her up. The job was a trap, and now she's going to have to pay with her own memories. This one was an oof to read, particularly the ending. It's powerful, but I was definitely very glad when I was done reading it, because it was a descent into a world that was very uncomfortable to be in for a long period of time. Alan, what did you think of this one?
I have to admit to a personal bias. I did not grow up reading science fiction. I kind of discovered that there might be something interesting that's not the 1950s ray guns and people on the moon from a New York Times article that I read back around 2002 or so that said there was this thing called cyberpunk that I had never heard of, even though I had seen The Matrix and like. So I did not really read any science fiction for the most part until then, and cyberpunk was the first thing I got glued into. So I have to admit to a bias very much in favor of the cyberpunk vibe and cyberpunk feel. I think that some of the prose in here was just wonderful. I think they did what a lot of the 1980s cyberpunk. She did what a lot of the 1980s cyberpunk novelists did, and really draw heavily from noir. There were some lines that could have come straight out of Raymond Chandler, like his van smells peaty and looks like a cozy home for a family of raccoons. I mean, that's a great description.
Yeah.
That's the sort of over-the-top noir language. I would say that the prose in here was just wonderful. It was it also solved a problem I always had with Neuromancer. I mean, near the end of Neuromancer, an important plot point is the female character decides to raise money for her enterprise by working as a prostitute for a while, because, of course, that's the best way for women to raise money in the future. Here, they are prostitutes, but first off, it's from the point of view of the woman character, not the point of view of the male character, like in Neuromancer. Second off, there's enough of the background in the story given that it at least makes it reasonable in this sort of hellscape dystopia, where that might be considered a least of evil sort of situation, as a way of getting permanently out of the situation, as a way of not money to start a venture and make money like it was in Neuromancer. I can't imagine any woman ever doing that. But as a way of escaping a much worse situation, I at least bought it. So I think it may have consciously been solving that problem with Neuromancer. I would think that just the way in which she describes when Nina is glitching and the way she uses the prose, I just thought was absolutely brilliantly done. I thought that she updated it almost to the present with the orange-colored skies. That looked like the Portland or Eugene when the Canadian forests were on fire. I think let's see. I just have so many of these lines written down from here because so much of this prose is just gorgeous. I thought the intensity of the story was incredible. I thought that it kept at such a high, intense pace that it just kept me in and engaged for the entire time. And I like the structure of where only at the very end do they flash back to their high school days where everything's happy and they have hope. Now, part of the reason why I don't bounce off this extreme cyberpunk is that in some ways it prefigures the need for resistance to this. By showing this is what is going to happen, this is where we're going, it implies that we really need to change and we really need to be thinking about these things. And to me, that's a much more hopeful message than I don't see it as dire and completely dystopic. So I remember being on a panel with Pat Cadigan back at Worldcon in 2016, and she had a line that I just absolutely love. She said that the cyberpunks never promised you flying cars. We promised you homeless people with cell phones. How do you like your future? And a lot of this could be the future if we let it. And that's what I see about cyberpunk, is I don't see it as depressing. I don't see it as grim. I see it as a sort of a slap to the face of saying, this stuff's got to change. It's got to change now.
All right. Leigh, what do you have to say? Allan had a lot to say. Do you have a lot to say too? You're on mute. There we go.
That's better. I really liked this one too. It was dark for sure. But I did see that there was a kind of hopefulness to their friendship, even though the ending is not happy. Because in the background, there is this whole thing where basically the world is trying to force people to not have these relationships, to not trust their friends, to encourage people to betray the people that they love for their own safety, basically. But these two are trying so hard to stick together, to stay together, to support each other. Which, in a way, I found that kind of a very hopeful element of it. And I really enjoyed the repeated use of Imagine, purple-haired girl shooting down the moon. because it gave it this kind of dreamy effect that I thought was interesting in the, in the world of cyberpunk, where it's all very, technology, that she is still trying to have an imagination, trying to escape from this in her own mind, which I thought was kind of beautiful.
Yeah, I was very interested in, but I could never actually saw a reason why the iterative AI that she's trying multiple different AIs with this verbal prompt, and the image that she gets from each of them is the same. I never found a reason why that was, and I'm not sure we're supposed to find an answer. But it's a question that the story asks that we never actually get an answer to, and it may be because it's not important to the story. But it's presented as a mystery that, and it is brought up several times, and therefore I was sort of left wanting a little bit more closure on that. But that's me. Brent, what did you think?
So I struggled with this one, not because of the story itself, but I guess because, for me, I guess one thing I'm kind of like sort of over in genre is the way sex work sometimes gets depicted. Because
yes,
I have friends who are sex workers, friends who've been doing sex work for well over 10 years, and it's not like this, or not like how you see it often in genre, where it's like you're getting the shit beat out of you every night, and every client's cutting you the ribbons and leaving you broken in pieces. And not to say that doesn't happen, obviously, because it does. Like, that there are things that sex workers deal with. But I guess for me, I kind of would like to see like more nuanced depictions of sex work in genre fiction, because, like I said, I have multiple friends who are in that in that industry, and they're happy. they're not tragic figures. They're not like decrepit souls that are like looking for an escape. Like, they're totally fine with it. So
they clock in, they do their business, they get checked out medically, they go back. I grew up in Nevada. Yeah. It's legal there in certain counties.
I have a friend,
and to me, it doesn't bother me.
Like, I have a friend, he's like, he travels the world. Like, he goes on more vacations than I can, I can ever go on it, and he's totally happy with it. So, I just sometimes, like, so I guess, for me, I had to kind of like put aside my feelings about like how genre kind of depicts sex work. And so with that out of the way, thinking about the story is actually really good. Like the descriptions of like it, I don't know, it's just like there's a texture to this world. Like you can I don't know, you can almost smell it. Like, it's really, really well, like it's really well depicted. And I thought what really brings it home is that last scene. That last scene just really like takes the knife and just jabs it in there, because and it was one of those things. As I was reading it, I was looking at like my cursor, and I was like, oh, there's not much left. I was like, what's gonna happen? And it leaves off with that. It almost feels like I don't know, like in my head I was kind of imagining like that one Love, Death, and Robots episode where the lady kept experiencing her death in the loop over and over again. But at least in terms of like visually, but it just was dark. It was dark, and it was well done. It was very well done. But I think for me, like, it was just, I kind of had to like do a lot of mental work to set aside my own personal feelings about like sex work and fiction. But I totally see why it's on this Nebula list.
Yeah. I can see all the technical reasons why it's an accomplishment. I can see all the reasons why it's good. I still bounced off it though, and that's just me. Next up is Saturday's Song by Wole Talabe that appeared in Lightspeed in May of 2023. This is a story told by the avatars of the days of the week as the narrators, who aren't supposed to change the stories that they tell each other. Wednesday is being punished with chains because she tried to do exactly that. But the story they tell is of a Nigerian woman who from childhood could not dream at night. Her mother tried to have spirits possess her to fix her lack of dreams, and then later to also fix her homosexuality, but spirits left her without changing her. Well, thankfully. And she was never able to forgive her mother for this. She ran away, managing to attend college with the aid of a charity, and fell in love with a female coworker in spite of the danger of Nigerian laws against female homosexuality. until her lover dies, the victim of an Orisha of nightmares. When she returns to her home, when she can find out what she can do with magic to fight the Orisha who killed her beloved. Not unexpectedly, I mean, I saw this coming a mile off. The Orisha who killed her lover was hired to do so by her mother, and she did that to get her daughter to come home and marry a man and raise children so they could be part of the Orisha worshipping community. The revenge part of this was unique and totally unexpected. She binds her mother inside of her own mind and becomes the village's chief conduit of the spirits in her place. And now every night she dreams. In the world of the days, that story has given them all peace, and they agree to release Wednesday and forgive her like a family should. It's elegantly written with lush descriptions, and the framing device, to me, pulls me out every time that I start to get a little traction. So I find it an interesting start, stop. I know he's doing it on purpose. I found it distancing, but that is, again, me and my bias for it, because I want to be as close in as possible. I want to be there in there with the narrator and live her life with her. That's where I want to be in any given story. But that's just, again, my personal bias. He has obviously an elegant and beautiful writing style, and I can see why it's on the ballot. So let's start with Brent.
This
What
one,
did you think?
I think I it's hard. I have like two that are like possible top favorites, and this is like one of them. I really, I don't know, like this. It felt like, what's that one Pixar movie where the girl has like all the emotions in her head and they're like guiding her through her life? This felt like this felt like an adult version of that movie where where you got to see these like celestial beings just kind of like. And what I liked about it was that even these gods needed to see this story to remind themselves of what they shouldn't be and don't and shouldn't, they should strive to be better. And I too saw that that twist coming that way, but I think like as a raging homosexual, I definitely related to that. I think on a really deep level because I was like in my head I was like I don't think my mother would want to kill my partner, but we certainly don't talk about my dating life at all. Like that's just like a non-starter topic. So I on some level I relate to that like having that family member that are family members that wish you were different or wish like they love you but they can't love all of you exactly. And I think like that anger that the main character felt about being like you just couldn't be happy, you just had to take this away from me, and distancing themselves, it was kind of obviously being like queer in Nigeria is a much more fraught experience than is here. Now I don't know if it's gonna stay that way here with trajectory for certain things, but it's I don't know, I just really enjoyed it because like it felt like a universal experience, and having those beings kind of like each of them, and I really thought it was clever too because each day of the week really felt like that day of the week. Like
I will agree with that.
Like Sunday being wise, okay, that makes sense. Monday being like harsh and stern, yes, absolutely, we all feel that way about Monday. And Saturday being the one that has enough like freedom and spirit to kind of tell the other day is like, hey, we can do better. Totally makes sense. So I really enjoyed it, and this was not my first, but I haven't read a lot from Wole. So reading this, I was like, oh, I think he has some novels out there. I might need to go grab a couple of them.
Yeah. My big thing was I was like, girl, how can you not know this was your mom?
Yeah.
How can you not? Don't go home. Don't go home.
Yeah. Well, and I think I think sometimes you can like, because you want to just think that person could not be that damn terrible, but like you like there's a part of you like even like you're still hoping like they're not great, but they can't possibly be that bad. And yeah.
Yeah, I wanted more of that. I wanted the niggling suspicion and that to be denied.
Yeah.
I wanted that sort of nuance to it, because it was like watching somebody walk into the haunted house. No, don't go in there. Leigh, how about you? What did you think?
I also really liked this one. I found myself both extremely invested in the story as well as the story of the day of the weeks and their relationships with each other, and the trying to, convince everyone to release the sibling who's been chained up. And yeah, I obviously saw that coming, that it was Mom. But also, yeah, you just, as like a real person as opposed to like in a fiction story sense, I also, yeah, you just don't necessarily want to believe that your mom would hurt you that badly. Like,
Yeah.
But yeah, yeah, I just thought it was beautiful, and it takes a bit for me to get into a story that does involve queer death. I feel like we've had enough of that, but
Yeah.
I thought that the story did that. Like it made it important in a way that, as opposed to just being tragic.
Yeah. Allan, how about you? What did you think?
Well, I saw the twist coming, but I realized why he did it, because this is actually a sequel. So, yes, this is a sequel. The first story, which was also out in Lightspeed, was Wednesday's Song. And if you want to see twisty plot and story structure that's really from another planet, that's like pulling everything, it's based on a couple different nursery rhymes and a fairy tale that he invents later in the story, that the surprise, the thing that keeps you going in the part, well, it's actually part 2 of this. There was also an earlier one called Thursday's Story or something like that I also read, but the Wednesdays that was what was surprising. That was what was going. And here, I think he consciously does something different. To me, what was surprising here wasn't the plot, but it was kind of the word choices and the comparisons he makes. So you go in throughout the prose and you see that was a really interesting way to say that. And that was what was surprising for me in this. I also recently read a shared world anthology that he edited called the Sautyverse, and other tales from the Sautyverse, something like that. And he did something very similar to these Tales of the Week stories, and that is that he combined realism and fantasy elements, so that one part would be highly realistic and there would be something that's complete fantasy, and it was mixed and entwined, kind of reminiscent of Neil Gaiman's American Gods, if I can think of anything that's comparable to that. And I think it often works. It often works really well for me. I've read a few other things that Wole has written, since we're both in Codex and we've been back and forth on the critique loop before. So his stuff has a very unique and distinctive style, but he can definitely do plot that has you on the edge of your seat. It's just he'd already done that in the Wednesday Song. So this was something different.
Interesting. I will have to go check that one out, because it will probably give me more in-depth clues in understanding this one that much better.
Yep.
All right, so our final story. All right. Our final story is 6 Versions of My Brother Found Under the Bridge by Eugenia Triantafiliou, and I totally messed that up. It's Greek. I apologize. It appeared in Uncanny in September and October of 2023. This one's going to take a little while to describe because it's a long story and a lot happens in it. Olga's little brother Petros died some time ago, and her parents clearly favored their younger child, to a point where their mother can't remember what Olga's favorite dinner actually is and always makes Petros's to cheer her up. Olga walks under a bridge that's said to be built over a doorway to hell, and finds one version of her little brother, one locked in a moment of extreme joy. But he's not the whole brother. She returns for the second time and finds a version of him locked in sadness. She realizes then that each time she finds a version of her brother, she's lost a part of her emotional core. She can no longer feel happy or sad. Mostly, she's just angry. By the time she returns for the 5th copy of her brother, hoping to collect all of him and put him back together, she's lost her empathy, her ability to care for her mother and father's grief. When she gets the 6th one home, she's bereft of anger, and none of them look like her brother anymore. And then the real truth emerges. Her father visited the bridge first, was offered a deal from the devil to trade his living daughter for his dead son. But I never said yes, he tells the demons. Then it's revealed that the mother made a similar deal, and then the daughter sealed the deal. Her parents insist on a different deal. They give up some mysterious, ineffable part of themselves, and Olga asks that the deal include that none of them remember this terrible bargain they've made. The doorway to hell is now permanently open. The devil will come for his due again someday, but for the moment, they're past the worst of their grief and can be a family again. I liked how this one ended on a hopeful note, but I'm not entirely sure that the ending is earned, because it seems so easy that they just make another deal in another room where Olga doesn't even witness what happens or anything like that. So I liked everything up until the last half page, I'd say. And then I'm sort of sitting here going, do I like the ending or not? And I don't know if I do. So we're going to start with Leigh this time.
I did really like this one. I feel like it was, as a horror person, this was definitely the most horror-y story. So definitely the most in my wheelhouse. I also thought it, again, touched on a lot of similar themes around dysfunctional family and grief as some of the other stories in the novelette category, which are themes that I also really enjoy exploring. So that was great for me. When I was a kid, I had a friend whose little sister died. And so I could very much see her parents in this story, in the way that the conflicted grief of, you lost your baby and maybe part of you wants that one back so much that you would have that thought for just a second that I would trade my other kid. But then, of course, you don't, because that's, we all have thoughts. And the idea of the demon like preying on those thoughts, I thought was exceptionally scary. I was okay with the ending, because I think in my mind, because it's a horror story, that it's hopeful for the main character, but I think whatever they gave up is worse. So that is my assumption anyway, that and the not knowing what they gave up is part of the horror to me. That unknown.
Interesting. To me, it would be more horrific to know what they gave up, but that kind of the rule of horror is that the less you see of the monster, the more horrific it actually is, because you're building in things in your own mind. So maybe that's what they were going for in this story. I don't know.
And given how much of the story is outside of the main character's control, and she doesn't know that, I feel like that followed that pattern of, her parents had made these deals to begin with, and then she sealed it, and now they have made another deal, and she doesn't know what it is.
Yeah.
And that's kind of some of the horror of being a kid, is being at the whims.
I thought
of
that
your
rang
parents.
very true. Yes.
Yeah.
I thought that rang very true. Alan, how about you? What did you like and dislike?
I think the best part of the story for me was the slow reveal of information. That it wasn't until very late in the story that I realized this was a story about grief and what the death of a child kind of takes from you, and you never get it back. So that was not told up front. I think it seemed like almost like a fairy tale for a while, until bits of the backstory were given by various characters, and then I put it together very late in the story. And I think, to me, that's what hit home, was the careful control of information. I really like the way she did that.
All right. And Brent, how about you?
I love the father. I think that was like my favorite character in the just because it felt I love like when there's like so many things unsaid with dialogue. I think that's like when dialogue is like really like doing some heavy lifting, and his just his just approach to her, like, you know, it's, you could feel like he was grieving and she was grieving, and he didn't quite know how to cross that bridge, and he was like trying to be, you know, still trying to be a good dad while still dealing with what he was going through. And, you know, and I just, yeah, I really love that character in particular. But
Yeah.
I think for me, at least, when she was interacting with her parents, like, those were, I think, some of the best moments. Like when she was in the kitchen and she was like, "I don't care," and I was like, "Oh, that's such a teenager response. That's such
Oh,
an
yes.
angry.
Oh, yes.
That's such an angry, just teenager response." And it makes sense. You know, you're an angry, grieving teenager, and you're having to hear about you know, this brother that you lost over and over, and you finally just lose it. Like, I don't care. Like, leave me alone. Like, let me live my life. And also too, I think what I really liked about Olga is that, you know, she did that teenager thing of thinking they have to carry the whole world on their shoulders and everything is their responsibility somehow. Like, she all the responsibility for her parents' grief, all the responsibility for trying to fix it. And I just thought that was I thought that was really well done. Also too, the different tales of what the devil supposedly did to other people, like sprinkled throughout the story, I thought was interesting. Like,
I liked the one where they said that was in the Bible.
And that's like, that felt so real, because it's like, you know, you'll be trying to have a conversation with your friend, they'll call you up like, "That's not true," or like, "That's not what." And so yeah, I just think it was the character interactions were just like really, really spectacular. I mean, I read a bunch of Eugenia's like shorts, so I'm not surprised. Like, this is just kind of standard for her. Like, she's really good at character interaction.
Yeah, she really is. All right. So now we move to the part of the broadcast where we ask you what's up for each of you. Anything else coming out soon or recently that you might want to talk about? And we're going to start at the top with Allen.
Well, I had a bunch of stories out in 2023. I think the one that got around the most was the one that I had in Dark Matter magazine called Side Effects, which was kind of simultaneously a hard science fiction story about side effects of medications, a soft science fiction story about quantum mechanics, and a comment on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The next one that I've got coming out, which I'm not exactly sure when it's coming out, but it'll be soon, is I have a reprint coming out in Stupefying Stories Cyberpunk 2.0 issue, which is Stupefying Stories attempt at saying, okay, what is new and taking cyberpunk in a new direction? And that's Bruce Bethke, the editor, was the guy who wrote the story Cyberpunk that gave it the movement the name. And I have it's a reprint called Salvation Seller's Last Customer, so that will be out in the next volume of Stupefying Stories. And
cool. Nice. Leigh, what's coming out soon or out recently for you that you'd like to direct people's eyeballs to?
Well, my two big things I had out last year was I had a story in an anthology called Rosalind's Siblings, which is a mostly science fiction as a kind of homage to Rosalind Franklin. So it's all about scientists of various genders doing science in all kinds of places. And mine involved some wasps on an alien planet and some moths, and it's possibly the most wholesome thing I've ever written, even though there is parasitism happening. The other one is at the end of the year, I had a novella come out, A Feast for Flies, which is a cyberpunk story about a woman who can read people's minds and eat their memories. And she's kind of forced into working for the police. And so it's about her and her service dog trying to escape this generation ship that they're all trapped on.
Interesting. That is a lot of different layers. I will have to check.
And right now I'm trying to sell a horror novella, so hopefully you'll see that soon, that actually involves grief over the death of a child, and yet more parasites, because that is my favorite. They're just so disgusting, and that's, yeah.
Well, you got to push the buttons with horror. There's terror and there's horror, and if you can get disgust in there too, you're pushing all of the major cortex buttons.
For sure.
Awesome. Brent, how about you?
So I had like 3 things come out last year. So I had my novella through Neon Hemlock come out called A Necessary Chaos. It's basically like Mr. and Mrs. Smith if like you threw some magic in there. It's like, and it like had a date with Final Fantasy. I guess that'd be that. That's kind of the best way to describe it. I also had a horror story in an anthology called All These Sunken Souls. It was basically about a mental institution for people who can see the future, and they've been kind of driven insane by it. So I also had a story, a cyberpunk story in fighting for the future, and it's basically it kind of marries like cyberpunk aesthetics with rave culture aesthetics, and like kind of like talks about using like the rave scene as resistance in this counterculture. So
Interesting.
yeah, and coming out, not an exact date yet, but I have a sword and sorcery story that's kind of like going to be in. It's like a queer take on like pulp science fiction and fantasy, and the title is the best title I probably will ever be a part of. It's called I Want That Twink Obliterated. So I immediately signed on the minute they told me the title, but no no date of release for that yet, but it should be coming soon.
All right. Thank you all for having been here for this episode. Shining Moon is going on a bit of a hiatus, so hit that subscribe button to be updated when we return with more fascinating people to talk to from the world of writing. Take care and be safe.